Okay, so we're going to be moving into factoring, right? We talked about dividing last week. We talked about greatest common factor already. Now, what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to factor the common factor out of each expression. Okay, so first of all, I look at all my numbers. And I said, all right, what's the biggest number I can divide them by? What number goes into 9, 6, and 24? The biggest number I can divide them all by. And I'm gonna say, well, a 3, right? A 3 is the biggest number I can divide them all by. Okay, so I'm gonna divide everything by 3. Now, letter-wise, what's the biggest exponent? What's the biggest v in this case that I can divide them by? I'm gonna give you guys a trick. It's the smallest exponent, v to the second. So my greatest common factor will be 3v squared. Okay. Now let me open parentheses. We're familiar with the distributive property, right? When there's a parentheses, the number on the outside, we multiply to the inside. We're familiar with the distributive property. I'm gonna do the distributive property backwards. Okay. So what I'm going to do to each of my terms, I'm gonna divide everything by 3. So all my numbers, I'm gonna divide them by 3. And letter-wise, I'm gonna subtract 2 from each exponent. Okay. Now, one thing, my number inside the parentheses should be a positive to begin with. So let me just say that my greatest common factor is not going to be positive 3. Instead, it's going to be a negative 3. I want my first number inside of the parentheses to be positive. So, okay, so I'm going to divide everything by negative 3. To make that easy, we're going to divide everything by 3 and switch the signs, right? That's dividing by negative 3. So negative 9, right? The first term, I'm looking at my first term. Negative 9 divided by negative 3 is positive 3, number-wise. Now, letter-wise, remember I said I'm going to subtract 2 from each v. So I'm going to have v to the third. Let me take a look at the second term. Positive 6 divided by negative 3. That's going to give me a negative 2. And then letter-wise, remember I'm going to subtract 2 from each exponent. It's going to give me v to the 1. Lastly, negative 24 divided by negative 3 gives me a positive 8. Exponent-wise, v, I'm going to subtract 2, so v to the 0. Might as well not even write it. Now, to make it a little bit nicer, let me put my parentheses there. When I look at my numbers inside of the parentheses, 3, 2, and 8, for me to know that I'm done, I should not be able to divide them by anything other than 1. Right? There's nothing other than 1. There's nothing that is a factor of 3, 2, or 8, which is the case. And again, my first the first number inside the parentheses should be positive. Okay. Let's take a look at question number 35. Now these numbers, 40, 50, and 25. What's the biggest number we can divide them all by? Think about it. Okay, so we should say 5. Okay, so I'm going to divide everything by 5. Letter-wise, I'm going to divide everything by n to the 4th. Remember, I always use the smallest exponent. Notice how the smallest exponent is not always at the end. Okay. So again, let me open my parentheses. I'm going to do the distributive property backwards. Looking at my first term. Remember, I'm going to divide by 5. Number-wise, divided by 5. 40 divided by 5 is 8. Letter-wise, subtract 4 from each exponent. 4 minus 4 is 0, so there's not even an n. My next term, a negative 50 divided by 5 is a negative 10. Letter-wise, I'm going to have n to the 1 because I subtracted 4 from each exponent. On the last one, a negative 25 divided by 5 is a negative 5. and then n to the 3. Notice how I did the distributive property backwards. Now, if you don't believe me, do the distributive property, right? Multiply the number on the outside to the terms on the inside, and you should finish with this. I'm not going to do it, but basically that's what this thing is. When it says factor the common factor out of each expression, I'm basically asking for the distributive property backwards. All right, let's take a look at number 36. What's the biggest number? I'm looking at 20, 36, and 40. And I was like, I can divide them all by 4. Letter-wise, I use the smallest exponent. And then I'm going to open my parentheses. I want my first number to be positive. Inside of my parentheses, I want my first number to be positive. So let me factor a -4 instead. Look in the first number. Remember, I'm going to divide everything by -4, and I'm going to subtract a 1 from each exponent, letter-wise, right? Number-wise, divide by -4. Letter-wise, subtract the 1 from each exponent. So -20 divided by -4 is +5. Then x to the second. -36 divided by -4 is +9. And then I get x to the 1. -40 divided by -4 is a +10. And then I don't have an x anymore. To make this nicer, let me put my parentheses there. Okay, let's take a look at number 37. 20, 30, and 20. The biggest number we can divide them by is a 10. Letter-wise, x to the 1, right? I'm using the smallest exponent. Okay, so I'm going to do the distributive property backwards. So what I'm going to do, on each term, I'm going to divide by 10. Number-wise, divide by 10. Letter-wise, subtract the 1 from each exponent. All right, in the first term, 20 divided by 10 is a 2. In the exponent, I get x to the 0, so don't write it at all. My next term, -30 divided by 10 is a -3. And then x to the 5th. My last one, 20 divided by 10 is a +2, and then x to the 1. Now, don't get confused. Part of our homework, it says the instructions are going to say factored the common factor out of each expression. That's what we did. But part of our homework is also going to say factor each completely. So make sure you guys read the instructions. Okay, so for today, factoring, we're going to learn what do we do when there's 4 terms. Okay? What do we do when there's 4 terms? We're going to call this factoring by grouping. Okay, so what I'm going to do, let me take a look at the first 2 terms only. I'm just looking at the first 2 terms. And what I just did in the previous 4 examples, that's exactly what I'm going to do to this 4 terms, right? So looking at the first 2 terms only, I'm thinking number-wise, 8 and 28. Let me factor out a 4. I feel I can divide it by 4. Letter-wise, let me factor out an m squared. Let me open my parentheses. So for each term, let me divide the numbers by 4. Letter-wise, let me subtract 2 from each exponent. So that's going to give me 2m minus 7. All right, follow me. I divided each number by 4, and I subtracted 2 from each exponent. Now, let me take a look at the last 2. All right, the last 2 terms. 6 and 21, I feel I can divide them by 3. But as a matter of fact, because I want the inside of the parentheses, the first number to be positive, in this case, let me divide by a -3. I'm not going to take out an m because my last term doesn't have an m. So I'm just going to divide each by -3. So -6 divided by -3 is positive 2m. 21 divided by -3 gives me a -7. Okay. Now, the next step is going to be my answer. One of my things is that the parentheses, there's two of them, right? Parentheses should be the exact same thing, which in this case they are. So one of my answers, when I factor this, one of my answers is going to be 2m minus 7. Notice how that is my parentheses. Like I said, they have to match. They have to be the exact same thing. My other parentheses is going to be 4m squared minus 3. That came from 4m squared minus 3. So one of my parentheses is the parentheses that matches. The other one is what I have on the outside. Now, your answer should have two parentheses. Which one do you write first? It doesn't matter, okay? This one I'm going to give it to you as a multiple choice. But just to see if you guys are paying attention, the order of the parentheses, I might put it different. Right? I just said you have to have the two parentheses. It doesn't matter which one comes first. The order of the parentheses doesn't matter. All right, let's take a look at number 39. Let me take a look at the first two terms only. I feel I can divide each by 3. Right? 9 and 3, I can divide each by 3. Letter-wise, I can factor the v squared out. I always choose the smallest exponent. All right, let me write my parentheses. Number-wise, let me divide each by 3. Letter-wise, let me subtract 2 from each exponent. So this is going to give me, let's see, 9 divided by 3 is 3. And then v to the 1. 3 divided by 3 is a 1. And then there's no v, right? So 3v plus 1. Now let me take a look at my last two terms. Let me factor a -2. I'm going to divide everything by -2. -6 divided by -2 is positive 3v. -2 divided by -2 is a positive 1. So my answer, my factors are going to be, one of them is 3v plus 1 because it's the common parentheses. My other parenthesis is going to be 3v squared minus 2. Basically what I have on the outside. Again, the order of the parentheses doesn't matter, so you're good. If you write, one parenthesis before the other or the other before the one, right? The order of the parentheses doesn't matter. Let's take a look at number 40 and 41. Looking at number 40, let me just pay attention to the first two terms. Number-wise, 7 and 35, I can divide each by 7. Letter-wise, I can factor a k squared out. I always choose the smallest exponent. So what I'm going to do, each number I'm going to divide by 7. For each letter, I'm going to subtract 2 from the exponent, right? So I get say 7 divided by 7 is a 1, and then k, plus 35 divided by 7 is 5, and then there's no more k. Okay, I have this as a 1k plus 5, but same thing as just k plus 5, right? Let's take a look at each, my last two terms. Number-wise, 6 and 30, I can divide each by 6. There's no letter, so I'm just going to divide each by 6. So 6k divided by 6 is just 1k plus 5. Okay, so one of my parentheses I wrote as 1k plus 5. The other parentheses I wrote as k plus 5. That's still the same thing, right? So my factors, one of them is going to be k plus 5. And the other one's going to be 7k squared plus 6. Okay, what do I mean with factors, actually? Why do we call this factors? If you distribute the k to both terms, and then you distribute the 5 to both terms, combine like terms, you're going to find this. Now, if you don't believe me, try it. Right, k distribute to the second parentheses, 5 distribute to the second parentheses, combine your like terms, and that's what you're going to end up with. Right, I'm not going to do it, but you guys can try it at home. Let's take a look at number 41. Let me take a look at the first two terms. Number-wise, nothing I can do. Letter-wise, I can factor a v squared out. So I'm going to get 2v minus 1. On the last two parentheses, let me divide each by a -5. I want the first term of my parentheses to be positive, so that's why I'm going to factor a -5 out. Okay, so that's going to give me, see, -10 divided by -5 is positive 2v. Positive 5 divided by -5 is a -1. My parentheses do match. So 2v minus 1. And my other parentheses will be v squared minus 5. Okay, that's what we did today.